Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing what we believe are the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from those authored by Jane Austen to plays authored by Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the small business owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and even leverage insights from great literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the restoration of the best of Western civilization here at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 97. With our book today, a collection of what are publicly available speeches and statements from the lips of a man who once said, quite rightly, that, quote, revolutions are based on land. Revolutions overturn systems. Of course, when the revolution is over, then the immortal lines of Juan Miranda from the film Duck You Sucka, or A Fistful of Dynamite from the 1970s, then become a little more accurate. And I quote directly from A Fistful of Dynamite, the people who read the books go to the people who can't read the books, the poor people, and say, we have to have a change. So the poor people make the change, huh? And then the people who read the books, they sit around the big polished tables and they talk and talk and talk and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, huh? But what has happened to the poor people? They are dead, close quote. This orator and revolutionary from the 1960s stood precariously between the revolution and what happened after the revolution as the heir to the ideas of Marcus Garvey and the revolutionary grandfather to Eldridge Cleaver. We will be joined on this revolutionary journey to explore this man's speeches and statements at the close of Black History Month in the United States with our returning guest and sparring partner from episode number 94, where we covered Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, Dorollo Nixon Jr. Welcome to the podcast, Dorollo. How are you doing today?
Thank you, sir. Pleasure to be here as always.
All right. And so we will be looking at Malcolm X Speaks. We'll be looking at several different speeches. We're kind of going to be moving around as we go through his speeches, and we'll be talking about revolution. We'll be talking about the literary life of Malcolm X, and we'll be talking about we're going to talk about what happens after you win the revolution, because that's when the hard part, the less romantic part, really starts to kick in. And there are lessons for leaders inside of that. So from Malcolm X's speech, The Black Revolution, this was a speech that was delivered at a meeting sponsored by the Militant Labor Forum at Palm Gardens in New York on April 8th, 1964. Malcolm X said, and I quote, "So today, when the black man starts reaching out for what America says are his rights, the black man feels that he is within his rights. When he becomes the victim of brutality by those who are depriving him of his rights to do whatever is necessary to protect himself. An example of this was taking place last night in the same time in Cleveland, where the police were putting water hoses on our people there and also throwing tear gas at them. And they met a hail of stones, a hail of rocks, a hail of bricks. A couple of weeks ago in Jacksonville, Florida, a young teenage Negro was throwing Molotov cocktails. Well, Negroes didn't do this 10 years ago, but what you should learn from this is that they are waking up. It was stones yesterday, Molotov cocktails today. It will be hand grenades tomorrow and wherever else is available the next day. The seriousness of this situation must be faced up to. You should not feel that I am inciting someone to violence. I'm only warning of the powder keg situation. You could take it or leave it. If you take the warning, perhaps you could still save yourself. But if you ignore it or ridicule it, well, death is already at your doorstep. There are 22 million African Americans who are ready to fight for independence right here. When I say fight for independence right here, I don't mean any nonviolent fight or turn the other cheek fight. Those days are gone. Those days are over. If George Washington didn't get independence for his country nonviolently, and if Patrick Henry didn't come up with a nonviolent statement, and you taught me to look upon them as patriots and heroes, then it's time for you to realize that I have studied your books well. 1964 will see the Negro Revolt evolve and merge into the worldwide Black Revolution that has been taking place on this earth since 1945. The so-called revolt will become a real Black Revolution. Now, the Black Revolution has been taking place in Africa and Asia and Latin America. When I say Black, I mean non-white, black, brown, red, or yellow. Our brothers and sisters in Asia who were colonized by the Europeans, our brothers and sisters in Africa who were colonized by the Europeans, and in Latin America, the peasants who were colonized by the Europeans have been involved in a struggle since 1945 to get the colonialists or the colonizing powers, the Europeans, off their land, out of their country. This is a real revolution. Revolution is always based on land. Revolution is never based on begging somebody for an integrated cup of coffee. Revolutions are never fought by turning the other cheek. Revolutions are never based upon love your enemy and pray for those who spitefully use you. And revolutions are never waged singing, we shall overcome. Revolutions are based upon bloodshed. Revolutions are never compromising. Revolutions are never based upon negotiations. Revolutions are never based upon any kind of tokenism whatsoever. Revolutions are never even based upon that which is begging a corrupt society or corrupt system to accept us into it. Revolutions overturn systems. And there is no system on this earth which has proven itself more corrupt, more criminal than this system that in 1964 still colonizes 22 million African Americans, still enslaves 22 million Afro-Americans. There is no system more corrupt than a system that represents itself as the example of freedom, the example of democracy, and can go all over this earth telling other people how to straighten out their house when you have citizens of this country who have to use bullets if they want to cast a ballot. Malcolm X, by the way, X was the name that he chose. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little, on May 19th, 1925, who died February 21st, 1965, was an American Muslim minister and, according to Wikipedia anyway, a human rights activist. And he definitely was one of the most colorful figures of the Black American Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and 60s. By the way, he was portrayed by Denzel Washington in a burning performance given under the direction of Spike Lee in the 1990s. Malcolm spent his adolescence living in a series of foster homes with relatives after his father's death and his mother's hospitalization. He committed various crimes, being sentenced to 8 to 10 years in prison in 1946 for larceny and burglary. In prison, he joined the Nation of Islam, adopting the name Malcolm X to symbolize his unknown African ancestral surname while discarding the, quote, white slave master name of Little. Malcolm X advocated Black empowerment and a separation of Black and white Americans and was very critical of Martin Luther King Jr. and the mainstream civil rights movement for its emphasis on nonviolence, which you heard in that piece that I read, and racial integration. By the way, if you live by the revolution, you die by it. And Malcolm X did indeed get assassinated on February 21st, 1965. Allegedly, there's still some murkiness on this, by members of the Nation of Islam. Some of Elijah Muhammad's boys, even though Elijah Muhammad claimed all the way to the end of his life that he never laid a hand on Malcolm X.
Well, that's also really good rhetoric then, right? Since he wasn't ever accused of being one of the actual assassins. So, you know, as soon as I hear that as a lawyer, it makes me smile because I just say, well, that's actually well put. That doesn't tell us much, though, other than that you weren't in the room. You could send the people in the room, but you weren't in the room. Okay.
Okay.
Not that I'm accusing him of having X killed.
No.
Not that I'm accusing him of that.
No. Besides, We're not
But
here
somebody
to,
had him killed.
somebody had him killed. We're not here to engage in slander. We're here to, well, we're here to talk about the impact of Malcolm X on Black culture and politics in America. So let's start there. I think there is a direct line from the not the intellectual leaders, from there's a direct line from Marcus Garvey to Malcolm X to Black Lives Matters, particularly the shock troops of Black Lives Matter, of BLM, the ones who were burning down cities, a few years ago. And so what do we do with Malcolm X? What do we do with Blount? How do we? I've hesitated to kind of touch on him on this show because he is so incendiary. But what the heck? Why not? Right. So what do you think about? What do we think about Malcolm X? What do you think about Malcolm X? How should leaders think about Malcolm X? Because he is taught in school as a revolutionary leader that was full of revolutionary elan.
Uh-huh.
And they sort of skip over the parts about the violence and the calls to action that he was making, and I think that's rather convenient. At least that's my thinking.
Yeah, joint meetings with Nazis. Yep, they don't mention that.
Didn't mention any of that.
His penchant for his favorite snack food, of course, it was crackers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
his whole penchant for that whole thing, right? Anyway, so I'm glad you did, because I think it's inevitable. I mean, from my perspective, he was like gasoline on a fire or nitroglycerin into an engine for the civil rights movement. He showed up with in a very different spirit, with a very different energy, with some high claims and with brilliant rhetoric that he used to expose some of the basic propositions at work in America, and some of the fundamental, his word would be hypocrisy, right? Mm-hmm. Or chicanery, mm-hmm. That was used to deprive so many Black men and women of the exercise of their rights, mm-hmm. right? And so I think if America were a system that just oppressed Black people and didn't have any rhetoric about equality and justice and freedom and liberty, his approach would be similar, but there would be less rhetoric and more shooting. Mm-hmm. We need to get free. This is not a free system, so we're going to overthrow it. The challenge, part of the challenge for him, was being able to use a system that is being misused against himself and against our people, to then get it to perform better. One of the lines he said in more than one speech was directed at white members of the audience, where he said, look, if this makes you uncomfortable, fine. You go tell the mayor to stop sending police dogs, right, attacking, yep, Black protesters, and then it will stop. And then you don't have to feel uncomfortable. And if you don't, your kids will grow up and look at you and point a finger and say shame. And right. I think it's actually a very valid point, where, there's an illicit permission from the white majority for what went on 40s, 50s, and 60s to for that to continue. That had to be there. If we back up, almost 200 years before that, right? Mm-hmm. The illicit permission was withdrawn, and the majority, in America, the majority of the colonists supported a revolution against the oppressive powers of the British Parliament, in the name of King George III. So, that illicit, that tacit permission, okay, that unspoken, that silent majority's willingness or unwillingness to stand up and take action, is very powerful. Is very powerful. And it also will help address, a later point that you're going to ask that I won't raise now, because we're going to address it later. But so, I think throwing gasoline on a fire, putting nitrous in an engine, this is what he brought. And of course, another way of putting it is he's our Che Guevara, right? He's the guy in the t-shirts. You don't have King on a t-shirt. You don't. Okay.
With
right.
the fists and everything.
You get fists and the pendants. And I mean, I used to have like an African pendant, like the 90s was big. It was like the 70s, late 60s redo. So I remember wearing that. The dashiki. I remember when I got one in middle school. My parents gave me one. I remember that, and I think that was slightly before that movie came out. And it's definitely one of my favorite performances by Denzel Washington. I will take that over Training Day 7 days out of 7.
Yeah, Training Day was the movie that Denzel promised us he wasn't going to do. Like that's the movie that's exactly the movie he promised. And that's where I realized Denzel. Well, Denzel's really just an actor. Like at the end of the day, like we have to. I'm not taking anything away from his acting, but at the end of the day, he is an actor. So he's not aiming.
Well, he's not a revolutionary. We know that.
Not a revolutionary. No, he's not. No,
he's not a revolutionary.
Not a revolutionary.
Yeah, I think my next performance would be the one where he did Stephen Biko. I didn't know who Biko was.
Oh,
and we watched that in school, and it was very moving. He did an excellent job. And he helped dramatize, another system where racial oppression had dog's teeth and not rubber bullets. And so,
well, and this is
people stood up to it as they should. So.
Well, this is the thing with Malcolm X. So Malcolm X is assassinated in 1965.
Right.
You have the riots of the late 60s. Then you have the Black Panther Party and Eldridge Cleaver and Soul on Ice and all them boys come out in the 70s. And then a weird thing happens. And I want to talk about this a little bit early, but a weird thing happens where Black culture splits between, and I'm going to use two different types here. It splits between Bill Cosby before we knew who he was and the Claire Huxtable line of the black folk. And then you get into, and then it splits between that and the more lower class rap culture, hip hop culture that eventually washes up on the shores of NWA and all those boys in the 90s, right? New Jack City, NWA, Boys in the Hood, all of that, right? And Black culture visibly splits in America in a post-Malcolm X world. My question here is, and I'm going to ask you a what if, would Black culture have split if Malcolm X hadn't gotten assassinated? Because it did visibly split.
But it's to me it's tough because, and I mean it's almost a cop-out. There are too many variables. But here's what I mean.
Right. Yeah.
Would he have succeeded in his revolution? Would he have succeeded in forming some kind of separatist Black community of actual size somewhere in the United States? Like a version of the Free State of Jones, right? Something like that. And there's actually a book I want to find that talks about various of those separatist movements, because there's more than one. And I found it fascinating just learning that, because I didn't know that. But anyway, so would they have succeeded? And who knows where it would have been? Because I mean, he was certainly an urban creature, correct?
Right.
It's not just he's not out farming. It's just I get no sense from reading his words that he had much of an understanding, despite what he said about Texas and Mississippi, of how life is in Texas and Mississippi for Blacks who live in rural areas. Therefore, It's hard for me to picture, his revolution producing something like separatism, within, urban spaces, certainly back east, right? Rather than a colony in the desert, like where I am, something like that. But, that's one of the questions. Would it have been successful? Okay, assume it would, but on what scale? And we can't tell what scale. Then, are we assuming he survives, but King still dies, right? Kennedy still dies. And so that means that, this great, because I mean, that was it's a decade where our fathers were killed, okay? Two Kennedys, King and X, slain, okay? Because the changes they were pushing for, people didn't want to have, and people were willing to kill them and did. And so those changes didn't happen, followed by, drug malaise-filled 70s disillusionment, right? And so it's going to get to a point that you still haven't raised, technically, but it's coming, because I didn't read it in the script. But it's drugs being part of the answer to that question. So it's just like, would that split, that shift, still have happened? Probably. I mean, going back to Invisible Man, right? What's weird is go ahead.
Well, what's weird is Eldridge Cleaver turned out to be a Republican.
Uh-huh.
After he got out of like after he went through all the stuff with the Black Panthers, and I think if I remember correctly, he went to prison. Um, you know, and he's a Republican now. Like
Hmm.
I don't think people have a concept of like how that occurs.
Hmm.
And it occurs, I think, because of, well, like, it's what you said. And we're going to talk about this. This is in sort of the, after we talk a little bit about his essay on the ballot, or not essay, but his speech, the ballot or the bullet. We want to tie that in. But we're 50 years on from getting everything we've gotten everything we asked for.
Hmm.
As quote unquote Black people, we've gotten everything we asked for. Matter of fact, we got it in a way that, to paraphrase from Martin Luther King Jr., who's paraphrasing from the book of Isaiah, justice rolled down the mountainside like water, right?
Hmm.
I don't know that Malcolm X would have known what to do with that.
Mm. Mm.
Revolutionaries almost never know what to do once they win. Lenin was the only revolutionary, Lenin and Mao too. Lenin and Mao were the two revolutionaries of the 20th century who knew exactly what they wanted to do after they won the revolution. Pol Pot, I would
Um,
throw in there too. He was like number 3.
okay. Um,
Everybody else seems
I
to have caught
mean,
by
you've got
they're like a dog that,
Ho Chi Minh knew what to do.
yeah,
And
okay,
arguably actually did that better than the other people you named.
yeah,
His system
probably.
is still going. His system is still going. You know, Mao's is fundamentally modified, still oppressive, but fundamentally modified, because Deng could read the writing on the wall, right? So,
Right.
and did. But yeah, so I know what you mean. But so the examples I thought of, though, revolutionaries who actually did have a plan, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess some of this though will relate to, well, is it a real revolution or not? Okay, because as you just quoted X saying, right? And I'm gonna find the actual full quote because I circled it.
Yep.
Revolutions overturn systems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Revolutions overturn systems. Okay. And so if we wanted to be technical or narrow, a revolution is successful just by overturning a system. So if you burn it down, great. You know, that may actually not technically mean you overturn the system. Okay. And certainly in a digital age, we know it wouldn't be. You destroy all the banks in America, well, the money isn't really the cash. So they're
Right.
okay. You know,
Right.
you'd have to destroy a whole lot of servers and other things to actually damage the banking system. And that would just be temporary anyway. They overturn systems, right? But a true revolution overturns one system and replaces it with another,
Right.
right? And so there are revolutionaries who are prepared for that next step. It's just, ironically or not, where I would expect to find them is functioning well within institutions that are primed to then step in as the new model and as the new actual institution. So the two who came to mind, Thomas Jefferson came to mind first. He came to mind, you know, super early. And then Hamilton came to mind this morning, where I said, oh, okay, these were people who one fought and one governed during our, you know, great American Revolution, which, contrary to what X actually said, they're Black people who fought in that revolution, you know, very many thousands. Okay, because that precious germ seed of freedom meant something. Okay, it meant something to them that they were willing to put their lives on line. So I'm not talking about people who were enslaved, who were forced to do fighting for their masters. I'm not talking about that. And there wasn't nearly as much of that. My understanding is there wasn't nearly as much of that during the Revolutionary War as there would have been during the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Or as did occur during the Civil War.
With that, we're going to go back to the book, back to the speeches, selected speeches and statements of Malcolm X. So I'm going to pick up from another one of his speeches that sort of backs up what Dorollo and I have been talking about. And I'm going to pick certain areas here to read because they're The whole thing sort of hangs together, and it is a long speech. It's called the Ballot or the Bullet, and this speech was delivered by Malcolm X to, let me go ahead and pull this up, 10 days after Malcolm X's Declaration of Independence. He delivered a speech, right, in Cleveland, given at the Corey Methodist Church on April 3rd, 1964. And Malcolm X, in the Ballot or the Bullet here, presented many of the themes that he had been developing as he had been holding and speechifying at public rallies in Harlem. And he was forming the ideology of a new movement. And in the Ballot or the Bullet, he lays out some of the ideas in this new ideology. By the way, an ideology different than that of the NAACP, an ideology different than that of CORE, which, oh gosh, and an ideology that really began his move towards Black nationalism and Black separatism. And I quote from the Ballot or the Bullet: "It was the Black man's vote that put the president administration in Washington, D.C. Your vote, your dumb vote, your ignorant vote, your wasted vote put in an administration in Washington, D.C. that has seen fit to pass every kind of legislation imaginable, saving you until last and filibustering on top of that. And your and my leaders have the audacity to run around clapping their hands and talk about how much progress we're making and what a good president we have. If he wasn't good in Texas, he sure can't be good in Washington, D.C., because Texas is a lynch state. In the same breath as Mississippi, no different. Only they lynch you in Texas with a Texas accent and lynch you in Mississippi with a Mississippi accent. And these Negro leaders have the audacity to go and have some coffee in the White House with a Texan, a Southern cracker, that's all he is, and then come out and tell you and me that he's going to be better for us because he's from the South, since he knows how to deal with the Southerners. What kind of logic is that? Let Eastland be president. He's from the South too. He should be better able to deal with them than Johnson." By the way, pause. The president he's talking about is Lyndon Johnson. This is following the assassination of John F. Kennedy in November of 1963. Back to the book, or back to the speech. "In this president administration, they have in the House of Representatives 257 Democrats to only 177 Republicans. They control 2/3 of the House vote. Why can't they pass something that will help you and me? In the Senate, there are 67 senators who are the Democratic Party. Only 33 of them are Republicans. Why, the Democrats have got the government sewn up, and you're the one who sewed it up for them. And what have they given you for it? 4 years in office and just now getting around to some civil rights legislation? Just now, after everything else is gone out of the way, they're going to sit down now and play with you all summer long, the same old giant con game that they call filibuster. All those are in cahoots together. Don't you ever think they're not in cahoots together? For the man that is heading the civil rights filibuster is a man from Georgia named Richard Russell. When Johnson became president, the first man he asked for when he got back to Washington, D.C. was Dickie. That's how tight they are. That's his boy. That's his pal. That's his buddy. But they're playing that old con game. One of them makes you believe he's for you, and he's got it fixed when the other one is so tight against you, so you never have to keep his promise. So he never has to keep his promise. So it's time in 1964 to wake up. And when you see them coming up with that kind of conspiracy, let them know your eyes are open, and let them know you got something else that's wide open too. It's got to be the ballot or the bullet. The ballot or the bullet. If you're going to be afraid to use an expression like that, you should get out of the country. You should get back into the cotton patch. You should get back in the alley. They get all the Negro vote, and after they get it, the Negro gets nothing in return. And all they did when they got to Washington was give a few big Negroes big jobs. Those big Negroes didn't need big jobs. They already had jobs. That's camouflage. That's trickery. That's treachery. Window dressing. I'm not trying to knock out the Democrats for the Republicans. We'll get to them in a minute. But it is true. You put a Democrat first, and the Democrats put you last. Look at the way it is with the alibis they use since they control Congress and the Senate. What alibi do they use when you and I ask, well, what are you going to do to keep your promise? They blame the Dixiecrats. What is a Dixiecrat? A Democrat. A Dixiecrat is nothing but a Democrat in disguise. The titular head of the Democrats is also the head of the Dixiecrats because the Dixiecrats are part of the Democratic Party. The Democrats have never kicked the Dixiecrats out of the party. The Dixiecrats bolted themselves once, but the Democrats didn't put them out. Imagine these low-down Southern segregationists put the Northern Democrats down. But the Northern Democrats never put the Dixiecrats down. Now, no, look at that thing the way it is. They have got a con game going on, a political con game, and you and I are in the middle. It's time for you and me to wake up and start looking at it like what it is and trying to understand it like it is. And then we can deal with it like it is. Now, I'm going to move forward a little bit in the ballot and the bullet. He says, I say again, I'm not anti-Democrat. I'm not anti-Republican. I'm not anti-anything. I'm just questioning their sincerity and some of the strategy that they've been using on our people by promising them promises they don't intend to keep. When you keep the Democrats in power, you keep the Dixiecrats in power. I doubt that my good brother Lomax will deny that. A vote for a Democrat is a vote for a Dixiecrat. That's why in 1964, it's time now for you and me to become more politically mature and realize what the ballot is for, what we're supposed to get when we cast a ballot, and that if we don't cast a ballot, it's going to end up in a situation where we're going to have to cast a bullet. It's either a ballot or a bullet. It's either a ballot or a bullet. In reading that speech from Malcolm X, I thought the more things change, the more they remain regrettably the same. I could hear these words coming out of, some Black Lives Matter activist gesticulating on Instagram. But what Malcolm X didn't get, because he didn't fundamentally understand, and he was playing his own game of centralization, what he didn't understand was that all politics are local. Or maybe he did understand that. I don't know. Even Washington, D.C. politics are local, which is something we don't understand in our era. And we actually saw this and explored this a little bit on this podcast when we read the letters or the essay by Theodore Roosevelt, talking about how when he was in Albany as a senator back in the early part of the 20th century, and people would come to him giving him a critique or asking him about a bill, they would come to him in a way that didn't respect what he did as a politician. The trends that began at the end of the Civil War and the collapse of Reconstruction continue through to today, wherein Black Americans too often look to the ballot and political power to solve cultural issues, which is exactly what Malcolm X, I think, was trying to do. Now, this works less and less well over the course of time because Black Americans are experiencing, as I've said before, the long-term economic, cultural, and moral effects of winning, basically, the revolution with the passage of the 1968 Civil Rights Act. This, of course, gets to the question that Dorollo and I have kind of been talking about already. What do you do after you win the revolution? What do you do after you've cast ballots or cast bullets? I am troubled. I'll put this to Dorollo. Dorollo, I am troubled by Malcolm X's lack of vision. I don't think he had a vision much past the revolution. I really don't. And I am troubled by the fact that tick seems to have been picked up by future revolutionary movements that ape the posture of Malcolm X, but they don't have any of the, as you put it, rhetorical skills. Comments on the ballot and the bullet.
Yeah. And it actually, if I'm not mistaken, it's most likely his phrase, but there's another, you're going to pardon the expression, there's another old Negro revolutionary who I believe said this first. Yep, there we go. Bear with me a sec.
Yep.
Yep. There we go. Got it. Nope, don't want that. Where is it? Where's the good part of the quote? There we go. From the first I saw no chance of bettering the condition of the freedman, meaning the freed black man, until he should cease to be merely a freedman and should become a citizen. And this is a point that X also brought up, right? The difference between being in America and being an American, and how it didn't take any legislation for a Polishman to become an American, but apparently it took legislation for African Americans to become American. And he meant in the 20th century when he was saying it, not in the 19th. Anyway, I'll pick up. I insisted that there was no safety for him, nor for anybody else in America outside the American government, that to guard, protect, and maintain his liberty, the freedman should have the ballot, that the liberties of the American people were dependent upon the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. That without these, no class of people could live and flourish in this country. And this was now the word for the hour with me, and the word to which the people of the North willingly listened when I spoke, period, close quote. And of course, what I'm doing is quoting Frederick Douglass, my fellow Rochesterian, and that great symbol of American freedom, Black American freedom, and opportunity in the 19th century.
Are you ready to elevate your leadership journey through exploring the wisdom of the ages? Subscribe to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast on all major podcast platforms, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube Music. You can also find us everywhere else podcasts are available. If you find value in our episodes, please leave a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, and of course, YouTube. We need those reviews to grow, and it is truly the easiest way to help other leaders and lovers of literature discover this show. And thank you for your support.
It's weird because I think X had real vision. He had, narrow experience, but real vision, right? And so he was somebody who would, in a monolithic sense, speak of the South and then extend it to the four corners of America. Whereas I think that the regional differences mattered then and still mattered even today. That the type of experience you can have and the types of opportunities that are presented to you or deny you, or that you can, the fights you have to get what is yours or what you're seeking, they don't play out the same way in the four corners of America. They just don't. And so, you said all politics is local. Culture is also local. And so those local differences matter. They're very real differences, even between Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. There's differences that are significant.
Oh yeah.
And anyway, so it's weird, but I think he had vision, in his real, transformative moment, of course, was when he went abroad. When he went abroad, and his Nation of Islam influenced thinking encountered Orthodox Islam practice in Mecca, Medina, and Jeddah, and then in other parts of the world, some of which I've been to, some of which me, the Christian, has been to. And that started the shift in his thinking. One of the reasons I think you're not going to see people on X or whatever who will have the force and the power of what, and this is going to be an interesting, dangerous statement, but of the force and the power of what X was saying is he actually seemed to be racist. And thus, when he's up there saying the truth that sometimes he will then clothe with this, offensive rhetoric, it's one of the reasons it had its power, And again, I go back to the statement that he made more than once to white members of the audience when he was speaking, like, look, if this is actually an issue, as I'm identifying it, you go to the mayor and say, stop sicking the police dogs on, Black people, and then it will stop. And so,
and he had a problem with "we shall overcome." Like, he mentions this several times in several different speeches. He
it
had a
really
problem with
got to him.
It really got to him.
That song really got to him, And he's got a great line about revolutions and there not being singing. It's in Message to the Grassroots, It's actually, so in our version, it's on page 9, right?
Yep.
You don't do that in a this is a quote. You don't do, actually, I got to back up because, no, you need a revolution. Who ever heard of a revolution where they lock arms, as Reverend Cleage was pointing out beautifully, singing, "We shall overcome"? You don't do that in a revolution. You don't do any singing. You're too busy swinging, And it's just like, it's funny. And on one level, I think he makes a point. Where it bothers me is that that's a song of hope. And it's a song that says, even though these are our darkest moments, the we're in jail, chained to a wall on death row moments, we shall overcome. That, with God's help, we will get through and overcome all of this opposition, because we know that when God started this great American experiment, that freedom, liberty, and justice were what he wanted for anybody who was there. And therefore, we will overcome. We will succeed in overcoming all of the machinations and filibustering and hypocrisy of our enemies, whom he also addressed, of course, in his speeches. Friends and enemies.
And friends and enemies.
Who says that? But it's great because we have them.
Right.
So why not talk to them? He did, you know.
Well, he also
people,
says,
when they pray, they're talking at Satan because they're dealing with their actual enemy. And there's something to that to recognize. Let's make no bones about this. This is who I'm talking to, and this is what I'm saying with this authority. And so he would do that. And I mean, so much of what happens, you know, now, and I mean, of course, you know, we're talking 64. He's talking about the election of 64 and Ballot and the Bullet. This is 60 years later.
60 years later, right?
So someone up there talking, okay, without, you know, someone up there talking, other than it, so this is obviously my point of view, but other than in certain limited circumstances, almost none of which are actually systemic. You can't get up there with that moral weight that he had and talk about, you know, the United States of hypocrisy, okay? Right. Because it's not that way now. I was at a rally, so my wife is Ukrainian. I was at a rally over the weekend in support of Ukrainian freedom, on the 2-year anniversary of Putin's invasion of you know, my wife's birth country. Anyway, one of the men up there with a big American flag, you know, no accent in English. I can't obviously comment if he had an accent in Ukrainian. Didn't have an accent in English at all. It sounded like a normal white man from Ohio. Okay. Talked about this being the land of freedom and opportunity. But opportunity, of course, is something that isn't presented to you on a silver platter, like John the Baptist's head was to Herodias. You know, you have to chase it. You have to work for it. And it's not just black and white people now in this dialectic or dynamic or dichotomy trying to do this. There's all these other groups. And in one of his speeches, he lumped them all together. He said, oh, when I say black revolution, I mean non-white. Okay. The problem with that is it obscures a multipolar world. That's one of the problems with that. Okay. And so in a multipolar America, as it were, where you have literally several generations of success for some Asian groups, and listen to me talking about groups, Asian Americans, okay, of different sorts, African Americans of different sorts, and even within our own community, as it were. Well, but what type of Black American are you talking about? Is this an African immigrant? You know, I was at a presentation yesterday by a certified financial professional who's from Burundi in East Africa, okay? And she's doing her thing and making her presentation. That's great. This woman has success. She has 2 master's degrees, as she told us in her presentation, okay? That was not the reality that X was fighting. The reality that he was fighting was an oppression that needed to be overthrown. And so now that, as you pointed out, okay, the revolution's conceded, great. Okay, so where are we? Part of the problem that people have who get up there with their BLM stuff is that the we and the where is now no longer monolithic, okay? And so now I'm going to jump to the point that you still haven't raised, but I will jump to that point if you let me.
Well, okay. 1 second before you jump to that point, I want to make one point. I want to make one point from that same speech where you mentioned, and this is the message to grassroots, and I highlighted something in here. It's on page 12, at the bottom of it, and I want to. When I read this, I started laughing because you talk about we shall overcome and how that just got in his craw, and this is why it got in his craw. And this is a fundamental religious difference between the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Islamic Malcolm X. There is nothing in our book. This is from Malcolm X. There is nothing in our book, the Quran, that teaches us to suffer peacefully. Our religion teaches us to be intelligent. Be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. But if someone puts his hand on you, send him to the cemetery. That's a good religion. In fact, that's an old-time religion. That's that old-time religion. That's the one that Ma and Pa used to talk about. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth, and a head for a head, and a life for a life. That's a good religion. And nobody resents that kind of religion being taught but a wolf who intends to make you his meal. That right there, I laughed out loud, because you talk about the weight of moral authority. The weight of moral authority came in both Malcolm X and in the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from their religion. That's where the weight of their moral authority came from. You're not going to get, in a modern era, 60 years later, you're not going to get the weight of moral authority from entertainment or from media or even from any form of cultural Marxism. You're not going to get the weight. That's why BLM frittered away. That's why all these DEI programs are frittering away. They have no weight of moral authority because they were based on something. They are based on things that do not. No, they were based on things that rest on other things that we don't talk about anymore. Capitalism has to rest on something else. It cannot just be itself. There has to be an underpinning to it. And this is something that I think we sense in our era, and leaders sense it, but we don't actually know how to put it into words. I think we struggle with how to put it into words. And then we look back and we try to adopt the rhetoric and adopt the pose and adopt the flash, but the substance underneath is missing. And thus you become a copy of a copy of a copy. You know, what is it? Coleman Hughes. I was listening to him talk the other day, and me and Coleman, we don't share the same religious beliefs. We just don't. We're not that guy. But he made a point. He said, when you go out and survey people, black and white, and you ask them how many black men got shot each year before 2020, they will say 1,000. Has to be 1,000. He said, actually, when you go and look at the numbers, because all of these crime statistics are reported, it's like 12 by cops. 12. Now, is that good? No, no one should be shot, blah, 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 all the usual bona fides, right? All the usual things we say to sort of buffer that. But 12? 12 is not 1,000. Where is your moral authority? And this is the thing. When you win the revolution, you have to establish your moral authority someplace else. And it has to be something that's going to be old time. I would prefer it be, and you and I would prefer it be that old time religion, that old time Christian religion, the New Testament Christian religion, preferably, if we're going to base it on something. But it's got to be based on that old time religion. And that was the thing that Malcolm X had, and that many of those revolutionary leaders of the 60s that we lionize now, that's what they had. They had religion. And we don't need to make that point as baldly as we should. Cultural Marxism isn't going to get you there. It'll get you into a DEI shakedown of a corporation. Somebody will get paid, and then they'll go buy a house. By the way, that's where you want to know where all the money went? That all those corporations donated to BLM? It went to go buy BLM leaders' houses.
Wow.
We know this for a fact.
It's a shame.
Didn't go into communities. It didn't help people get out of prison faster. Didn't do any of that crap. It just went to go buy some cultural Marxist who's running a grift another house.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because it was such a powerful hashtag, and then it ends up, spawning this movement, and then the movement starts going in these directions, and it's like, hey, let's back up.
Right.
When you're protesting the unjust murder of a black man by a policeman, I got you. I'm there with you. Let's do this. Okay, because this shouldn't happen to anybody. I don't care what color the person is. This is not how it's supposed to go. The police are supposed to enforce the law. They're supposed to catch people who break the law. They're not supposed to take the law into their own hands. That's one thing, but they're certainly not supposed to break the law trying to achieve whatever end. We got that. I mean, the whole moral impulse behind Watergate rests on that principle that
Correct.
You're there, the law binds you too.
But where does the law come from? We never talk about where the law comes from. This is a worldview issue. What worldview? Doug Wilson, the pastor Doug Wilson, says it's either Jesus or it's something else. That's it. You got it. And we don't, my God, one of the things I want to do on this podcast this year is talk about, and we're going to talk about it in the coming months on this podcast, but worldviews really do matter, because everybody's walking around talking about solutions, not talking about solutions, talking about problems. Where are we going to base our solutions?
Right.
What is going to be the foundational rock? And you're going to coming back in July to talk about the foundational documents. Those guys, the founding fathers, the American Revolution that even Malcolm X mentions, it wasn't based on Islam, kids, and it wasn't based on secular atheism. Nope. Right. It was based on Christianity, rock-ribbed Christianity. So George Floyd's death, while tragic, and the other 12 black men and the other thousands of other men from of other hues and colors and different levels and degrees of melanin, their deaths, while tragic, if we're going to protest that, we have to figure out what our worldview is from protesting that. And it cannot be based, I don't think it can be based on a Twitter hashtag. You don't have the moral authority.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah.
And I get excited. I get irate about this because it drives me absolutely nuts. It drives me absolutely crazy. And so it does. It drives you crazy. That's why I get up on my high horse about this. Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. Yeah. So one of the issues that we're going to address is this elan of revolution.
Yeah.
That apparently has worn out among average Black people in America. Still has some purchase for elites within Black culture.
Right.
So,
Claudine Gay thinks that she's fighting a revolution, making $900,000 a year as now the former president of Harvard. And I can name other people too. You make a $900K a year, honey. You're not fighting a revolution. Sorry. You're not.
Yep. I hear you. So the question for me is, okay, well, but why has that happened? Why is revolution something that Black people on any kind of scale, Black people in America on any kind of scale, with few exceptions, just don't seem to be interested in? Okay. And of course, there's a line, and not just a line, there's a whole dynamic within the movie Jerry Maguire. For which, of course, Cuba Gooding Jr. got his Oscar. And I remember my late father, who used to tell me from time to time, oh, someone mistook me for Cuba Gooding Jr. And I used to think that it was the craziest thing he was saying until I was standing with him once when it happened. And I was literally so mad at the woman. I was so mad. Like, how can you not see this is my father? No, he does not. Like, anyway, in the movie, though,
yes,
his character, his brother was still militant. And he's
right.
like, Tipu, we love you. You're still militant. Of course, he's standing, doing his raising fist, just like I am right now, except I'm seated, raising the fist.
Yeah. Played by the great Aries Spears.
Yeah, but even then, right? That was one guy in a family.
Right.
That was one guy in a family. It wasn't whole households, at least in that movie. It wasn't whole households, right? But it's just, why is that the case? And I think there's several dynamics that explain why, even from 1968 to 1993, that's when the shift happened. But you could even back up. The shift was probably done sometime in the 80s. But anyway, but there's several dynamics that played out that to me help explain why revolution doesn't really sell. You can't sell revolution to most Black people in the street,
right,
or certainly in the office, but even in the street, it's not a thing. Here's why. I think it's because of mass incarceration, suburbanization, and drugs. Okay, plus the destruction of systemic racism, or most of it in America, and then the increase in economic success that certain Black individuals and families and communities have experienced. And so because of that, the we is now in quotation marks. And then the location where we are, the place, that's also in quotation marks, because, you might be able to sell it to someone who's still ghettoized, to someone who, ghettoized, grew up in foster care, is dealing with a gang, but the right way, meaning they're fighting them. You can sell that person on revolution, absolutely. What that's much easier to do than to sell that person on opportunity. But why is that the case? Look at that person's experience. Look at his experience. He's a man in my head, so look at his experience. This explains why. When you teach him that America is about freedom and opportunity, he thinks you're crazy because that's not what he knows. And then when you take him out of those environments, right, and you introduce him to another environment where people invest in him, support him, instruct and guide him into more mainstream experiences in American culture, then there's a real revolution, but it's an internal revolution. And all of a sudden, his whole perspective shifts, and he can see, wait a minute, this was here this whole time. I just had to go 35 blocks that way, but this is here the whole time, and I can make use of this and then start to do something, give back, have an impact, and live out those values that he now has, that accord very much with the existing American system. It fascinates me.
Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show. Did you ever watch the show The Wire on HBO?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right.
And I probably saw 1 or 2 episodes.
Okay. All right. I watched all 5 seasons of that show.
Wow.
I am a huge The Wire fan. Huge fan of that show. And The Wire, number one, I don't think we're ever going to do something as complex and as deep as The Wire on American television again. Like, I don't think we have the capacity, the writing capacity. Talk about what your worldview is based on. The current writing that we have in Hollywood and in popular culture in general is just sort of cannibalizing off the past because there's no foundational elements underneath a lot of what is being produced now at the mass culture, quote unquote, level. With that being said, The Wire and The Sopranos are probably the 2 best shows of the early 2000s, bar none, and of the early 21st century, bar none. Great writing on both those shows. There's a character in The Wire who is on drugs named Bubs. And Bubs tells one of the detectives one time who's trying to get him off the street that it's a thin line between heaven and here, right? And I always think about that when I would live in the kinds of places that you and I both came from, and I would see people who have a university in their town that they have easy access to, but they can't walk it's a long way from, I won't say the name of the high school, but it's a long way from that high school. You know which one I'm talking about. In the downtown of where we were at, it's a long way from there to that university in that town. It's a long walk, even though it's only a bus ride. And that was demonstrated in The Wire, through Bubs, through Bubs experience, through a couple of other experiences in the of characters in the show. I mean, one character in the show, he starts out as a drug dealer, goes to jail, and basically talk about having his eyes open, has his eyes open because he starts reading books like To Kill a Mockingbird, because he finally has time to read.
Mm-hmm.
And he was always smart. He knew how to play chess. Actually, there's a great scene in the show early in the first season where he's explaining to the other drug runner kids on the corner how to play chess because they're screwing it up. And he's like, nope. You know, like the queen stays the queen, and the pawns move around, but the king stay the king. and you know, there's all these sort of iconic ideas that are in The Wire, and it layers in this depth. So anyway, this character goes to jail, finds out that his uncle basically betrayed him, and he gets killed in jail. But before he gets killed, he has that light bulb go off of, oh, I could have had a middle class life. He doesn't know that word. He doesn't know that term. And of course, he believes in racism and police, you know, brutality and and he doesn't tie it to the life choices he's making. He's just existing inside of this system, and it's a long way from where he is in the Baltimore housing projects to the University of Maryland
or Johns Hopkins,
which is literally right over there.
Yeah, Johns Hopkins is right over there. It is a very long way. Yes.
And I don't think we do a good job. No, I won't say we do a good job. I think that the full realization of the victories of the revolution is this conversation we're having right now. I think this is the full the full revelation of the results of the revolution. I mean, I said this before. You've been to Cornell. I went to college. I was talking about my net worth with somebody this weekend, and he was kind of surprised that like his net worth was as high as it was. He's like, I don't really think I should say this out loud, but I'm going to tell you about it because I really want to whisper it, because like where I came from, I didn't imagine that any of this was going to happen. But he did all the right things, right? Like he's had, you know, stayed married, built up assets, you know, had his kids, got his kids out of the house. He did all of the things that you're supposed to do. And what's weird to me is now in our era, we tie that to systemic racism or whiteness, and none of those things are color coded. They're just the elements of success. They're not color coded. Being on time to a meeting when you're expected to be on time to a meeting is not color coded. Being on time is not acting white. It's just not. And you know, I look at all this as, you know, my final victory over all those black people years ago. All of my, you know, fellow travelers who were trying to be whatever, and I wasn't part of that.
Except on time, behaving, and getting the question right. Yes.
Right.
Anything but those three things. Right.
Anything but those three things. Because, well, and even this, you even see this in the decline in rap culture, right? Like Kanye was the first rapper who kind of sort of pulled the cover off of the game and said, my mama had a job. I didn't sling drugs. I'm just the greatest rapper ever. Like, I'm just great. My pain does not have to be a part of this struggle, because there was no pain. I lived a middle-class life in Chicago. I'm doing this because I'm the greatest at it, because I have talent at it. That's why I'm doing it. That was Kanye's fundamental, before he went off the rails, Kanye's fundamental sort of mindset, right? And that turned the world of rap culture inside out. Along with Eminem. I think Eminem had a lot to do with that also, because who expected a white boy to be able to spit like that? But, you know.
Yep. And there's still the NBA and the NFL.
Yeah, there's all those things.
They're my examples of why we don't really believe in affirmative action. When we
lay that out.
drive
We
by a
you
playground
can't
in
you
the
can't
inner
just
city,
you can't just drop that on the folks. You got to lay that out. Go ahead. Why don't we believe in affirmative
when we
action? I think I
drive
know where
by
he's
a
going.
playground in the inner city and we see a basketball court, we have an idea in our mind about what the players are going to look like. They're going to look like me. And when they don't, well, those boys can really play ball. That's how we see it. That's it. There's no other way of looking at it. And it's just showing people that all you need to do is just expand that mindset to every single industry, venture, and endeavor, and all of a sudden it's cool. All of a sudden it's cool. You know, the people who don't get it are people who, when they find out, I think I remember where I was, but when they find out, for example, the Eminem is not black, because I thought he was black. I listened to him and thought he was black, and then I had to be informed, no, this guy is white. What? It was a trip. Okay. Literally, it sounded like Urkel rapping, but could rap. That's what, and I remember being in a car listening to this, like, oh wow, okay, wow. Wait, what? He's what? Okay. The people who then say, okay, this is either not legitimate or even worse, because that I can understand aesthetically or otherwise somebody taking that position. I think they're wrong, but I can understand that. I can't understand. I liked this until the moment I learned the identity of the person who is producing all of this rhetoric and music and beats, etc. And now because I know who he is, I no longer like this. And it's just like, you know, those people, they're not going to get it.
No.
But the rest of us, which is certainly most people in America who have lots of melanin, okay, when we go to an inner city basketball court, when we go to an NBA game or a college game, okay, where the college has enough students, okay, at least 20,000, there's certain things we're expecting to see on a basketball court. And when we don't see them, we expect the people we do see there to be really good. Okay, fine.
That's why Larry Bird is the greatest white man to ever play basketball in the history of the NFL, or I'm sorry, the NBA. He just is. He just was. Like, he was just better.
He was good.
He embarrassed everybody. The story of the I think it was in the 1984, I don't remember. But Michael Jordan tells this story because it was when he was either a rookie or in his second or third year in the NBA. At the All-Star game, they have the 3-point shooting contest, and Larry Bird walks in his zip up, walks onto the court in his zip up, walks past the Lakers players, walks past the Celtics players, walks past everybody. And then you're talking about Robert Parrish, Magic Johnson. You talk about all those old boys, right? Jordan was just in the league, and he looks at the entire row of talent. He goes, who here wants to come in second? Goes out, wins the 3-point, doesn't even take his zip up off.
Yep.
Done. Yep. Comes in first, takes his award, holds it up above his head, and then keeps the zip up on, just walks right back out again. That's brutal. That's Larry Bird.
Yep. Wow.
Who here wants to come in second?
Yep.
Because you don't, at that time in the NBA, you did not expect a white guy to be that good. You just didn't. Okay. Now, it opened up the door for Dan Martley and Christian Laettner and Bill Laimbeer and all these other guys that wound up being really, really talented and really, really good because they worked on their craft.
Yeah.
I would love it. And I think the franchise is expanding anyway. The franchise is expanding. That's why I said, well, yeah, we have sports, but the franchise is expanding away from that. I mean, Black people are moving into more and more areas, and it's just eventually, like I said, at a certain point, we're just going to be Americans. That's coming, much to probably Malcolm X's surprise. You know that we have other ways for you to engage with this show, right? We have bonus episodes featuring interviews with interesting guests, working, thinking, and of course, writing at the intersection of leadership and literature. We have shorter episodes, 15 minutes long now, relaunched for this season, featuring introductions of our books and the background of our featured authors, from Augustine to Jane Austen and Ernest Hemingway to Joan Didion. So, Listen, subscribe, and check out those other formats, and tell all your friends in leadership and literature about this show.
Well, I don't know, because some of his last comments, he's got one on interracial marriage, and he basically does some delicate dancing to avoid having to say, yeah, I was wrong. But, gets to the point where he admits, that, people are people. And so he didn't have an issue with a man marrying a woman or a woman marrying a man, regardless of what their colors were, the colors of people, which thankfully to, very many of your listeners may be as basic as what they're going to eat for dinner. That's great. But it not only was it not like that, 60 years ago. The Supreme Court decision that struck down racial intermarriage prohibitions on a state level throughout the United States, that decision isn't even 60 years old yet. Loving v. Virginia is not 60 years old yet. So it used to not only be significant for very many people, it used to be the law in very many places. Anyway, but it's interesting because it brings me, I believe the comments were made the month before he was killed. But it brings us to a moment where we can tie together, his vision that, grew over time. And frankly, I think a commitment to certain notions of freedom and justice, that he had those. And thus, as he became more informed on as he became more informed on human nature, he was able to get past that, what do I want to say? Do I want to say protean? But basically, the white-black racial dynamic that fueled so much of his thought and rhetoric. Okay, he was finally able to get past that and see, okay, look, there's more to life here. There's more to humanity here. There's more to America than just this dynamic. And it's ironic because at that point, when he began to affirm that what equality means is, you have these other peoples too, and they have their identities too, and they have the same rights as well. All of a sudden, he actually became dangerous because now you have his background, his rhetoric, his platform. Okay, you have his to his credit, his commitment to Islam went through the Nation of Islam version with their prophet Elijah Muhammad, right, to Orthodox Islam with Muhammad, right, that prophet from 1400 years ago. But the beliefs held, and he continued to practice, continued to pray. He's, one wife and I believe they have 5 children. And so he continued to show that moral example, continued to show that commitment to the belief system that he self-identified with for so long. Okay. And now that he saw, hey, it's all of us in this boat and all of us have these rights, not Black and white people are in this boat and we have the same rights they do. It's a very different posture, you understand? But once he got to that point, now he was actually dangerous because now he can no longer be a mouthpiece for somebody else's political agenda. Okay, the political and the power agenda of the people who wanted to make little kingdoms out of just Black people whom they could then run and control. Okay, arguably not very different from a plantation at all in very many respects, just the color of the master. Anyway, at that point, he became actually dangerous, and then he was killed. It's just so does it? I would be shocked if evidence were produced. Certainly because it's almost 60 years ago, 59 years ago. Actually, this month, 59 years ago. Actually, last week, if I'm not mistaken, 59 years ago.
Last week.
Wow, that's terrible.
February 21st.
R.I.P. to Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz.
Let's
go ahead.
Well, I want because this ties into what we were going to talk about on the question that we've sort of been answering through the entire through this entire episode today. And I want to go into this a little bit deeper. But let's go back to the book. Let's pick up from Malcolm X's speech with Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. So he gave this speech at let's see, in December 1964, right? During the time when representatives of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party toured northern cities, seeking moral, political, and financial support for their campaign to block the seating of Mississippi's 5 segregationist U.S. representatives when Congress convened on January 4th, 1965. So he gave this speech in response to the the violence that Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, the MFDP candidate for Congress, had experienced, and her testimony that she gave before Congress about racist brutality that had attracted wide attention at the Democrat Party National Convention in August of 1964. So he's giving this speech in response to the events that occurred to Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. And I quote Malcolm X, Reverend Joseph Coles Jr., Ms. Hamer, honored guests, brothers and sisters, and as Dorollo pointed out, friends and enemies, also ABC and CBS and FBI and CIA. I couldn't help but be impressed at the outstart when the Freedom Singers were singing the song Oginga Odinga, because Oginga Odinga is one of the foremost freedom fighters on the African continent. At the time he visited Atlanta, Georgia, I think he was still the Minister of Home Affairs in Kenya. But since Kenya became a republic last week and Jomo Kenyatta ceased being the prime minister and became the president, the same person you are singing about, Oginga Odinga, is now Kenyatta's vice president. He's the number 2 man in the Kenyan government. The fact that you might be singing about him to me is quite significant. 2 or 3 years ago, this wouldn't have been done. 2 or 3 years ago, most of our people would choose to sing about someone who was, passive and meek and humble and forgiving. Oginga Odinga is not passive. He's not meek. He's not humble. He's not nonviolent, but he's free. Oginga Odinga is vice president under Jomo Kenyatta, and Jomo Kenyatta was considered to be the organizer of the Mau Mau. I think you mentioned Mau Mau in that song. And if you analyze closely those words, I think you have the key to how to straighten out the situation in Mississippi. When the nations of Africa are truly independent, and they will be truly independent because they're going about it in the right way, the historians will give the prime minister, or rather President Kenyatta, and the Mau Mau their rightful role in African history. They'll go down as the greatest African patriots and freedom fighters that the continent ever knew, and they will be given credit for bringing about the independence of many of the existing independent states on that continent right now. There was a time when their image was negative, but today they're looked upon with respect, and their chief is the president, and their next chief is the vice president. I have to take time to mention that because, in my opinion, not only in Mississippi and Alabama, but right here in New York City, you and I could best learn how to get real freedom by studying how Kenyatta brought it to his people in Kenya and how Odinga helped him, and the excellent job that was done by the Mau Mau freedom fighters. In fact, that's what we need in Mississippi. In Mississippi, we need a Mau Mau. In Alabama, we need a Mau Mau. In Georgia, we need a Mau Mau. Right here in Harlem in New York City, we need a Mau Mau. I say it with no anger. I say it with very careful forethought. The language you and I have been speaking to this man in the past hasn't reached him. And you can never really get your point across to a person unless you learn how to communicate with him. If he speaks French, you can't speak German. You have to know what language he speaks and then speak to him in that language. When I listened to Mrs. Hamer, a Black woman, could be my mother, my sister, my daughter, describe what they had done to her in Mississippi, I asked myself, how in the world can we ever expect to be respected as men when we will allow something like that to be done to our women and we do nothing about it? And then a little bit further down, when I was in Africa, I noticed some of the Africans got their freedom faster than others. Some areas of the African continent became independent faster than other areas. I noticed that in the areas where independence had been gotten, someone got angry. And in the areas where independence had not yet been achieved, no one was angry. They were sad. They'd sit around and talk about their plight, but they weren't mad. And usually when people are sad, they don't do anything. They just cry over their condition. Now, he goes on for a bit, and he talks about the Democrat Party. By the way, he calls them the Cracker Party. And then a little later on, once he breaks that down, he talks about the differences between the Republicans and the Democrats. And so a little bit later on, he says this, and I quote, they said, don't rock the boat. You might get Goldwater elected. I have this bit of suggestion. Find out what Wagner is going to do on behalf of his resolution that you're trying to get through before January 4th. Find out in advance where does he stand on these Mississippi congressmen who are illegally coming up from the South to represent Democrats. Find out where the mayor of the city stands and make him come on the record without dilly-dallying and without compromise. Find out where his friends stand on seating the Mississippians who are coming forth illegally. Find out where Ray Jones, who is one of the most powerful Black Democrats in this city, find out where he stands before January 4th. You can't talk about Rockefeller because he's a Republican, although he's in the same boat right along with the rest of them. I say in my conclusion, as Mrs. Hammer pointed out, the brothers and sisters in Mississippi are being beaten and killed for no reason other than they want to be treated as first-class citizens. There's only one way to be a first-class citizen. There's only one way to be independent. There's only one way to be free. It's not something that someone gives to you. It's something that you take. Nobody can give you independence. Nobody can give you freedom. Nobody can give you equality or justice or anything. If you're a man, you take it. If you can't take it, you don't deserve it. Nobody can give it to you. So if you and I want freedom, if we want independence, if we want respect, if we want recognition, we obey the law, we are peaceful. But at the same time, at any moment that you and I are involved in any kind of action that is legal, that is in accord with our civil rights, in accord with the courts of this land, in accord with the Constitution, when all these things are on our side, we still can't get it. It's because we aren't on our own side. We don't yet realize the real price necessary to pay to see that all these things are enforced where we're concerned. And then later on the next page, and I'll close with this, they've always said that I'm anti-white. I'm for anybody who's for freedom. I'm for anybody who's for justice. I'm for anybody who's for equality. I'm not for anybody who tells me to sit around and wait for mine. I'm not for anybody who tells me to turn the other cheek when a cracker is busting up my jaw. I'm not for anybody who tells Black people to be nonviolent while nobody is telling white people to be nonviolent. I know I'm in the church. I probably shouldn't be talking like this, but Jesus himself was ready to turn a synagogue inside out and upside down when things weren't going right. In fact, in the book of Revelations, they got Jesus sitting on a horse with a sword in his hand, getting ready to go into action. But they don't tell you and me about that Jesus. They only tell you and me about that peaceful Jesus. They never let you get down to the end of the book. They keep you up there where everything is, nonviolent. Now go and read the whole book. And when you get to Revelations, you find that even Jesus' patience ran out. And when his patience ran out, he got the whole situation straightened out. He picked up the sword. That's that old time religion.
That's brilliant.
To paraphrase from the movie Patton, with the great George C. Scott, when he was yelling about he went to Corsica, or maybe it was Sicily, I can't remember right now, and he was looking at the results of the tank battle from the German tank commander. I cannot remember his name, but he yells out, "I read your book." That's what I thought. That's what I thought when I read this.
Rommel,
I read your book. That's right.
And I don't know if Patton did. Montgomery actually did. Viscount Montgomery of Alamein actually did. Like he in his tent in North Africa had a picture of his enemy in the tent because he was that much in the zone. Truly impressive. Not that Patton wasn't. He was flamboyant, very much an American.
Very much.
And very effective. And of course, also bearing the seeds of our culture's issues. And then, that in part makes it tragic.
It does.
Yeah. So, Malcolm X and leadership, right?
Well, Malcolm X
would show up and open his mouth and things change, All
right. So point I want to make. And I think it's one that struck me in reading that speech about Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer. And we read The Invisible Man and talked about Nameless. And you mentioned something in that episode which kind of triggered my brain. He said it would be a different Invisible Man would be a different book if Nameless or The Invisible Man had opened up one of those letters, read what it saw, and then gotten on the train, gone right back to Dr. Bledsoe with an axe and just fixed the problem, right?
Yep.
Yep. Malcolm X is the person that the Invisible Man transforms into once he's out of Ralph Ellison's basement.
Yes, I see what you mean.
But he has to get out of that basement first.
He does.
Which is the hardest part. And I think that that's what Malcolm X saw. He saw that or no, not saw. He confused nonviolent struggle with Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man and being trapped in that basement.
Not struggling.
Not struggling.
Not being violent. Right.
Just not being violent. Just hanging out, keeping the lights on, just hanging out, right? And look, I even wrote this in my notes. You know, nonviolent struggle has always been an anathema to non-Christians, and a foolishness to a person who believes that violence is the logical response, right? You know, we preach Christ crucified. You know, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Greeks, I believe is how Paul put it. And so,
right on. Finish the quote. Finish the quote.
I don't know.
But to we who are being saved, it is the power of God.
It is the power of God. There you go. So, but this is also why nonviolent struggle really only worked, and I put that in air quotes, but worked in like twice in the 20th century. You know, you had Martin Luther King Jr., and then you had Gandhi, and that's really it. That's it. And man, you know, revolutions may be driven initially by the desire to correct injustice, but too often they are hijacked by people with other motives. And usually those other motives are the 7 deadly sins. Again, from that great actor, Morgan Freeman, that great black actor, Morgan Freeman, there are 7 deadly sins, Dorollo. And, you know, the revolutionary is angry at the oppressor, yes, but they're also angry at their own Dr. Bledsoes.
Oh yeah.
And so,
yep.
And so now we live in a world, we live in a Black Lives Matter world, we live in a DEI world in America anyway, which I think is the last gasp of nonsense. I don't think it's going.
It will morph into something else. I would bet you money. I'm not a betting man. I would bet you money there will be the new iteration. It will continue until Christ returns.
Okay, yes, it will, yes.
Those efforts to get everybody's attention, get everybody angry about what really isn't an issue. Or when it is an actual issue, great. Oh, okay. It's a particular issue. Deal with it. Deal with the issue. Okay. So at the protest I was at over the weekend, the woman I was speaking to, one of them, we brought up North Charleston. Okay. North Charleston refers to one of these incidents where a policeman shot and killed a black man. Okay. Then lied about it. And everything was going one way until a kid shows up with a video that shows that this man lied. He said this man was running toward him. The video shows the man running the other way and being shot in the back and killed. Okay. Policeman was fired. The policeman was arrested. The policeman was prosecuted. That's the system working.
Right.
The jury acquits the man. That shows brokenness in the system. Okay. It's really straightforward in terms of the evidence, whatever. Okay. That's one thing. That's a particular circumstance and it needs to be dealt with. Okay. And to then take it and extrapolate it over the whole country. Now remember where this happened. South Carolina, local matters, regionalism matters. Okay. Yeah, that's where the Confederacy started, in South Carolina. This happened in South Carolina. Okay, to then extrapolate that throughout the whole country, to cover every single incident where somebody claims the police did something wrong. It's infuriating, right?
Right.
But it also obscures the issue. North Charleston, that's a tragedy. That's an issue. That needs to be addressed there, you know? And you can't do that by social media. You can't do that from a television studio in Los Angeles or whatever. You have to do that on the ground in North Charleston. Living there. You talked about paying the price of the actual revolution. That's some of the price, some of the cost. You know, okay, if I actually care about these people and these issues, I got to put roots in the ground. I got to put boots, not just boots in the ground, I put roots in the ground like a tree. And that takes, the thing that's awesome about trees, one of the things, they take time to grow.
Right.
There's no quick fix to what happened in North Charleston. There's no quick fix to that.
No.
You know, I think it could be done in a generation, but with the right type of sacrifice, with the right type of investment, with institutions. One of the reasons I don't find Invisible to be like Malcolm X is, for better and for worse, his moment of revelation, of change, happened when he then got integrated into an institution. And it's the institution of the Nation of Islam that gave him a platform upon which he could stand, and then with all of his rhetorical brilliance, communicate to people, and then was leading. He needed an institution. He got one from the beginning. Invincible had no institution. The institution he was part of was morally bankrupt. Both of them, the one in the South and the one in the North. The one in the South that was an education institution, and the one in the North that was a political one. Each of them was morally bankrupt. And it's more means justifying ends nonsense, right? That goes part and parcel, not just with Marxism, but with any oppressive system, okay? Where you don't matter. Your only utility comes from how you will help us achieve our goals. And when we're done with you, we don't care what happens to you. Turn and burn.
So what is the so solutions to problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am obviously a partisan for Christianity. I believe that is the thing that changes people's hearts, and changes people from it changes people, it changes institutions. It's the most revolutionary. Talk about revolutionary. It is the most revolutionary religion on the planet. Full stop. Period.
Yep.
Full stop.
Yep.
Nothing else gets close. It just doesn't. And I'll take the Pepsi challenge on it against anybody who's listening to me on that. You can't find me a more revolutionary religion than Christianity. You just can't. Here in the West, and we talked a lot about this last year on the podcast, but here in the West, we collectively decided we were going to walk out Friedrich Nietzsche's quote about killing God, right? We decided collectively we were going to do that over the course of 100 years. Mm-hmm. And now we're at the end of all of that. I firmly believe we're at the end of postmodernism, and we're casting around for something else, and we're not finding it. And the thing that I believe fundamentally, the thing we have to go back to is Christianity. But at a very narrow level for Black people in America, mm-hmm. We caught the car of racial justice. We caught the car of equal protection under the law. We caught the car of broad social acceptance, and even interracial marriage, right? We've caught the cars that we were chasing like dogs down the street. We've caught them, right? And there's no prize for coming in second. And I'm worried that we have a bunch of people who are riding on the coattails of past revolutions and past racisms and past this and past that to cover up for their incompetency and quite frankly, their mediocrity. Mm-hmm. And in my shorts episode that I released this week, one of the things I said, because I do lay out a vision for Black people, a 5-step vision for Black people moving forward into the future. And, it's all common stuff. But one of the parts of the vision is don't go get a job being a government bureaucrat. We don't need more government bureaucrats. We need more entrepreneurs. Don't go get a government job. Don't go get a corporate job. Go work for a small business. Go start something from the ground up. Do a side hustle, something, anything. We don't need more of you in the civil service. Politics will not protect us anymore. So here's how this ties into leadership.
You mean the government won't protect us anymore? Is that what you mean?
I don't think so, no. Either protect us in terms of giving us sinecures that are with guaranteed salaries and pensions, or protect us in terms of even getting, justice from a jury. At long last, Black people have become just Americans. And you can see it most notably in our current era in how united everyone is about illegal immigration being a real problem. Yeah. So I guess my question to close out is, what should leaders take from Malcolm X? What can they take? What can they use? how can leaders solve this problem of what to do after you win the revolution, but not in the way you expected to, right? Like, you got what you wanted, to paraphrase from Amy Mann, the great singer in that song in Magnolia. There's a great line in that song from the 1990 film, or 1999 film, or 98 maybe, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, where she sings, "You got what you wanted, and now you can hardly stand it." Like, and
Yeah.
I'm dropping pop culture references all over the place in this sucker. But what can leaders learn from Malcolm X? Let's start with that. What can they apply to their real lived lives from the words and the statements and the speeches of this man?
Well, he obviously knew what leadership was. But one of the most powerful, I think one of the most powerful examples that we came across in his speeches in this book, edited by George Breitman, ironically or not, is him talking about the mainstream civil rights movement. And what I'm just going to call this section is the Carlyle Group. Okay. And of course, I'm not referring to the financial services entity or, private equity fund, whatever they are. Though they take their name from the same place. Okay. The Carlyle, AKA the Carlyle Hotel. Okay. Even though its formal proper name was the Carlyle. Okay. He, in about 2 pages, describes apparently how somebody created a committee that they then financed, that they then used to recruit, popularize, and then suborn a March on Washington. So that, like a virus, this committee infected its own ideas into the host, and then all of a sudden, their version of the movement was what the movement was. And I thought it was a brilliant example of how leadership actually works. I thought it was a brilliant example. Okay. How a committee of people can lead better than one person in this type of sense. Okay. Because it's not about decision making only. There are other aspects to leadership, and this committee apparently they did an excellent job. Whether you agree with what they did or not, so my assumption is what he's talking about is relatively accurate. Okay. And so whether you agree with what they did or not, to me, it was a brilliant example of leadership. Okay. And I thought that was worth something. Okay. As an example of how this worked, and how leadership works. Okay. Then, there's also the lesson that the leader's personal life actually matters. Okay. One of the reasons that Malcolm X had a moral resonance is because, morally speaking, once he became Muslim, his life was pretty clean. Okay. One wife, here are the kids, a respectable family man who then gets up there and then launches into his rhetoric, right? Just pounding people over the head with his rhetoric around the notion that the tyranny and oppression that had been plaguing Black people, as he said, for 310 years, needed to end now, and that we would end it, whether it was by voting or by shooting, we will end it. And so he had a force in his life, and the things going on in his personal life help explain why he had such force. Okay. And then what's his MO for leadership? Well, apparently it was speech making. I don't see that he did anything else. I don't see that he did anything than show up and talk. Literally. It's brilliant. And not even show up and lecture, and you have to get through content in a curriculum. Not even that. Show up and deliver your insights on topic X. Bang, next, bang, next. It's brilliant. Okay. And so, but it's not merely brilliant, it's also leadership, right? Because he gave a voice to what many people were feeling, certainly, and what they obviously couldn't put into words as brilliantly as he did. And it caused things to change. And so those are, among the measurements for me that show that it's leadership. Okay. He's giving a voice to people who had these feelings, didn't know how to put them into words, but then it's provoking action. Okay, he shows up and he talks, and things start changing.
I wonder how, and we'll never know, obviously, but I wonder what Martin Luther King Jr. thought of him when they both sat down without cameras around and the other followers and all. Like, I wonder what that. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that conversation, because, and it had to happen at least twice, because what we now know is the FBI and not the CIA. he claimed CIA. And maybe they were watching him when he went overseas. They probably were. But the FBI actively had a file open on Malcolm X and found nothing, by the way. Nothing. There's never been anything that's ever been revealed, to your point, about anything. I mean, Hoover was looking for it. Hoover knew what to look for. By that point, I mean, he was running the FBI for like 20, 30 freaking years. He knew what to look for. Nothing. On Martin Luther King Jr., though, we know there are things the FBI found on him that if they had been revealed at the time, would have discredited Martin Luther King Jr. from doing the work that he did. Okay, we know this for a fact. I wonder if that asceticism came through in Malcolm X's interpersonal interactions with Martin Luther King Jr., or if it was just, two gals on a stroll on a Sunday. It was just two gals having a chat. Like, how much of that personality that was in the oratory carried into, now we're just going to have to sit here and talk one-on-one and figure something out. I always wonder about that with guys like that, because you're right. The personality was so strong and seemingly unscripted, which means it was natural talent. And he would say things, like, as an orator will do, he will say things, watch the crowd, and then give them more of that. Hitler did the same thing. That's why he was a great orator. I mean, look, there's everything else, please, but like, he knew how to move the crowd. You cannot take that away from him. And he knew how to move the crowd in a way that Roosevelt didn't and Mussolini didn't. Those guys did. Churchill probably got close second on that. Churchill knew how to move the crowd, but that's because Churchill worked on it for so long, right? Whereas Malcolm X, man, he seems to have just shot from the hip. He seems to have literally just showed up. You point him at a microphone and that man just goes. Order my latest book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership, co-written with Bradley Madigan. This book offers insights, ideas, and presents a framework for addressing the most pressing leadership challenges in the postmodern leadership landscape we are navigating today. Pick up the paperback, hardcover, or ebook everywhere you buy books, and leave a review on Amazon. And thanks.
But he kept learning.
Right.
He kept learning. And ultimately, I think that led him, on a path that was certainly more truthful, but was wending toward the truth, which is exciting.
How much do you how much do you think that there could have been a rapprochement between him and Dr. King?
Without Malcolm X becoming a Christian? I doubt it. So I found some of his comments. So the comment you quoted where he's talking about Al-Quran, I found some of it, what the heck is this? Sorry. Some of it inaccurate. And so let me find it. There it is. It's on page 12. It's still in Message to the Grassroots. There's nothing in our book, Al-Quran, that teaches us to suffer peacefully. I believe that's true. It's the next bits. Quote, our religion teaches us to be intelligent, period. Be peaceful, be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. Semicolon, close quote. I don't believe that it teaches respect for the law that is produced in Darul Harb, right? In the realm of war, which is one of the ways in Orthodox Islam, the world is divided into two pieces, right?
Correct.
Darul Islam, the realm of peace or submission, and then Darul Harb, the realm of war. Okay, and so I don't believe it teaches in the realm of war when whoever is sovereign lays down the law and the person is a pagan or an unbeliever, that you need to obey. I don't believe that's what it says. And so I think there's a particular dilemma that Muslims walk who live within the West, and thus who live within political and social structures that have a Christian base, is that, how do you navigate that line? And, as I believe is the case for virtually everyone, you have to ask them to find out, right? Mm-hmm. It's just from the outside, I see a tension there, okay? And it's a tension that resonates when you hear some of the rhetoric coming from other parts of the world, where the things that the Islamists, as they're popularly called now, when you hear and read what they're saying, that tension all of a sudden is resonating. It's like it's glowing, and it's like, yes, there's a tension there, And so there's different positions that Muslims within the West take on it. But anyway, this is interesting because that's like I remember reading those comments and saying, "Oh, okay, agree with the first one." And it's like, nope, not this one. Let's circle this right here. Somewhere in there are the notions that give rise to the necessary politicization of Islam. It's part of the DNA of the religion.
Right.
And so, that's why there's states all over the world that happen to be Muslim states. And it's not an accident. It's not an accident that happened from Morocco to Indonesia. It's not an accident. It's in the DNA of the religion. Whereas the DNA of Christianity, as it were, is not political. It is in the Bible, to submit to the governing authorities. It's there. What let's not call him his second name, call him his third name. What Mr. Al-Shabazz said, right? And what he was advocating for, I would argue, was merely, calling into question the hypocrisies and the systemic oppressions of a system where it's like, you say you're Christian, well, do what Jesus said, and that would have put it better. Okay, right. You're a Christian, to do what Jesus said. If you do that, we're good. If you won't do that, do not turn to me and tell me that I need to. Okay, because apparently you're willing to accept that we're going to depart from this because this is how you're really behaving, and then would be the devolution back to that old time religion, right? An eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth, which is reprisal and vendetta, which is what happened with Pashtunwali, okay, which is probably my favorite way it's ever articulated. It's an institution among the Pashtun people in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and it's really fascinating. But it's basically, me against you, you and I against our cousin, you and I and our cousin against our uncle, you and I are our cousin and uncle against the next house, against the next street, against the, but what is at bottom, right, is a mechanism to produce some kind of justice when there's an injury that's done to someone in that network. And so, old time religion.
Well, and what's interesting is, as we've wandered away from old time religion, and again, I've said this before on this episode, but I'll say it again, I think that leaders need a baseline of meaning that comes from something deeper than whatever their current role may be. And that baseline of meaning will keep you either as close to pure, as close to pure as you could probably get this side of the grave. And that is and that's a lot of weight to put on a system of meaning. And I don't think a non-religious system of meaning is going to be able to carry that weight. I don't. The track record is not good. Let's just say that. The track record is not in the positive. All right. Well, I think we've covered everything. I think we've gotten to the end of our time here together today. So I'd like to thank Dorollo Nixon Jr., Esquire, for coming on and joining us once again on our podcast. He will be back in July talking about the American founding documents, the USS Constitution, the Federalist Papers, the USS. It's not a ship.
Yeah.
The ship of state. Yeah. And of course, it's an election year. Who knows what will be happening? We will talk about the ship of state and where it may happen to be in July. Hopefully, the ship of state will still be floating. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But Dorollo will be joining us in July. So pick up those episodes, listen to those episodes, listen to the Invisible Man episode, listen to the episode where we talk about the global Appalachia. We talked about that last year in our Constitution and Declaration of Independence episodes. And of course, go out and pick up or go ahead and read online the speeches, statements, and utterings of Malcolm X and see how you could apply those to your real lived leadership life. Once again, my name is Jesan Sorrells. This is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, and we're out. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.